and welcome to the last day of our Bodhicitta practice retreat. Like all these things, it feels as if it's gone very fast. So we've got this session and the next one, session 3. So that will be it. So this is the penultimate session, which I suppose means session 3 is the ultimate session, doesn't it? So where do we need to start this morning? Oh, a couple of things before we go any further. One is just so you're clear that the Sunday Bodhicitta practices, they're going to continue through October. There was talk of stopping them for a month at least, but they're going to carry on. So the first one tomorrow, which will be better suited to people in Australia and New Zealand, that will be Parami, and the second one at 2:30 UK time will be Vessantara. So they kept trying to get me to do it, and I kept ducking and diving because I've been on retreat and things, but I finally given in graciously. Sort of a week with you has sort of warmed me up, so I thought, oh, all right, maybe I can do it now. So yeah, it's great that the practice continues, and yeah, we can keep seeing some of one another like this, and yeah, keep building the momentum of the Bodhicitta practice. So that's that. And yesterday I promised you a Tonglen handout, which we haven't actually handed out. We'll do that. If we send it now, people are going to read it. That's the only problem. No, I can probably see if people read it, so that might deter them. So if you got it there somewhere, James, you could just when it's handy, you could just put it, make it available. Okay, I think that's all we need to do to start off. So let's start with some practice this morning. I do look pretty red this morning, don't I?
Pink Kesa.
Is that pink Kesa?
Yeah.
It's the light they've got shining on me. It's not nothing internal, I promise you. So giving ourselves a little time to settle. Taking all the pressure off. As best we can manage, just relaxed awareness of the present moment. Now, feeling our connection with the earth. And in touching the earth with our awareness and energy, the sense of something unshakable. As if we found a Vajra seed. And the Vajra seed also suggests centrality. We're becoming centered in ourselves. And centered in our experience. Not leaning back towards the past, not leaning into the future, not pulled and pushed by experience. Stable. From there, the whole body can rise up freely. Again, balanced, centered, steady. That stability isn't rigid, not becoming some kind of stone Buddha. It's alive, flowing. We feel into that life, that flow in the body. Constant transformations, feelings, sensations. Now coming to our heart center. And in whatever way feels best, linking into our connection with Bodhicitta. Maybe through our heart wishes. Now staying in touch with that motivation. Finding the breathing. While the breathing continues, let's start to turn our attention to who we're practicing with. All the support we can draw on, that sense of solidarity with other practitioners. So, starting with all of us practicing together now. And with the in-breath, let's just breathe that in. During the out-breath, we just feel the effect of that influence, of that connection we have. We all practice together. Now we can widen out a little more to the whole order. Which is collectively committed to the Bodhisattva ideal. Draw on it and its everyday sense. Draw on that deeper energy which is fueling the altruistic dimension of our practice. We can be aware of the great stream of bodhicitta practice coming down through the Buddhist tradition, through Bhante's teachers, communicated to us by Bhante. Breathing that in, letting it fill us, empower us. Relax us that we're not doing this thing on our own. widening out, including every source of bodhicitta, wherever it may be. And outside time and space, all the Buddhas of the three times, and so on all levels. So we are practicing making our energy available at the service, this great stream of energy, positive qualities. Just entrust ourselves to all that goodness, all that love, all that wisdom. Now, just for a few minutes, turn our awareness to who we're practicing for. Particular person or people or situation. And just let all that goodness, that love, that wisdom flow through us and out with the out breath to them. Now with the out breath, letting that goodness, that love, that wisdom just flow through, the sense that it's going wherever it's needed. Now, if we've been making any effort to do anything, we let it go. Now we transfer the merits to all beings. We just make sure that we're well grounded in the body as the meditation comes to an end. Could you just scroll me through some pages? Okay, so before we go on looking at the practice, I'm aware that for some of you this will be the last session, and particularly the last live session. Hope you'll listen to the recording of session 3, but particularly some of you in Australia and New Zealand. Yeah, this is our last chance to see one another live. And I just want to really thank Dharmananda and Maitripala for convening and facilitating and helping to make the retreat work for you. And yeah, I really appreciated that very much indeed. And personally, it's been great. You know, I've made a lot of trips to your part of the world, and I feel a strong connection with people in Australia and New Zealand. It's lovely to see friends here, and yeah, it keeps our connection. I really value that very much indeed. And I value the fact that quite a few of you have been having late nights, particularly in New Zealand, to watch these sessions live. Okay, so yesterday we were breathing in and out yesterday, that's right. And we were practicing Tonglen. And I've still got a lot of questions. I don't know what to do about them all. Well, I'll have to pick and choose. There's no way I can answer them all. Unless we can somehow have some bonus footage later, you know, I can do a couple of question and answer sessions. Yeah, there are one or two about Tonglen, and I hope I'll at least get to those. But let's keep going with the practice. So when we've been practicing the Tonglen, as we've seen, it's important that we do see the practice having an effect. Yeah, we see that transformation, so that yeah, it's like some architect or athlete or whatever, you visualize what you want to come about, yeah, because that inspires you to do it. And on some kind of subtle mental plane, it's almost like you create with your thought a certain kind of energy field which sort of encourages that outcome. Yeah. So there are all beings, and all that suffering has gone. So we're in the realm of sympathetic joy. So then the practice says, number 7, when the sins of all beings, or whatever we want to call them, not all beings, the sins, are completely purified, and they're all filled with bliss, the refuge tree, or whichever image of enlightenment one has evoked, dissolves into a blaze of light that diffuses into the blue sky. So the refuge disappears and the whole visualization disappears. The practice omits to mention the fact that we have all living beings, you know, around as well, but they also dissolve away into the blue sky. And so if we have the refuge tree in front, or if we have our yidam, or whatever embodiment of awakening we have in front, that dissolves into the blue sky. And same if we're practicing more in that self-discovery way, and we have the refuge in our heart. Again, if there's a form there, we can allow that to dissolve away if we want to. So we're brought back to newness. It's like this we've gone into the blue sky. Out of that, we've created this whole world. And rather than the sorts of worlds that we usually create for ourselves, which are unsatisfying, we created one which really satisfies our heart. We created one which has enabled as much of our goodness and love and wisdom to come through as possible. But then all the worlds that we create, they arise in dependence on conditions. So eventually all that goes back into emptiness, and then we're going to create the next world for ourselves. But we want as much carryover from the practice as possible. So when the refuges dissolve, we don't want the sense of, oh, well, they're gone and I'm back, oh, that was all very wonderful, but now I'm back, little me, going off to eat my breakfast. Yeah. Where did the refuges ever go? I know we talk about, some of the leaving for the land of the Rakshasas or Amitabha in the Western paradise, but that's, we don't take any of that literally. Where do the qualities of awakening go? They can't go anywhere. They're always here. The only problem is we keep scurrying off in all sorts of directions and not actually, we get lost in experience in all sorts of ways. But the qualities of awakening are always here, waiting to be discovered. So part of the learning of everything dissolving back into the blue sky is that the qualities aren't limited to the forms. Yes, we're trying to wean ourselves off, having to feel that compassion appears as a green lady, or whatever it may be, or wisdom appears as a young guy with a sword and a book. We're trying to not sort of go back and leave the refuges behind at this point, but we're trying to widen it out even more, to have the sense that we needn't be so dependent on the form to feel the qualities. So what we want to do is, yes, okay, we let the form disappear, and we have the sense that the qualities are still available. The qualities are still available. So yes, if we had, say, the yidam in our heart, we might not want to keep sort of maintaining a visualization of something, but there's that sense of our heart having love and compassion and wisdom and being a deep source of joy and knowledge about how to live. We don't dissolve that away. We don't need to. That's what we want. So the dissolution is a freeing of ourselves from being attached to form, and we're very attached to form. We cling to characteristics, as the Mahayana texts tend to put it. We want to be able to experience the qualities, in any kind of situation. And the blue sky also is a fresh start. It's a coming back to the newness of experience, the newness of this moment. And it's also a reminder. It's a reminder of how things are. It's a reminder that yes, we may have been very engaged and absorbed in the world of the practice, and now it's vanished like a rainbow. And again, we want to remind ourselves of that everything is like that. So that in sadhana practice in general, we're learning to appreciate and enjoy and engage, but with a sense that this isn't substantial and solid and always going to be here in this way. So we're not grasping at it as real. We have to kind of create a sense of things being solid and substantial in order to feel like we can grasp at them. If we really saw things as like rainbows, it would be obvious that we couldn't grasp at them and hold on to them and rely on them and make them our refuge. So we're, through the practice, through that sort of dialogue between the appearances and all that we learn and our engagement and our interaction and the blue sky, showing us that, yes, and this isn't real quite in the way that we usually take things as real. We learn both to engage and to be free. So to appreciate without grasping, to fully engage but without getting stuck on the experience. And that's what we need when we go into situations where there's suffering. We want to be able to fully engage but without getting stuck. We want to fully engage but without sort of taking it all as so real in a sort of heavy way that we're disempowered. So the blue sky is trying to help us to have that sense, that we treat life lightly. We engage our energy, we engage our heart, but at the same time we're aware of the flow, and so there's a lightness to our engagement. There's a movement to our engagement. We're not stuck. And that makes a real difference to how we engage with the suffering in the world. Which maybe leads me back to one or two of the questions that I got about Tonglen. Particularly, one or two of you have been, I think, wrestling a bit with analio and empathy, and that's that whole area. And I think it's well worth wrestling with all that, wherever we end up with it. It's good material to explore, to make more conscious our own attitudes and how we do engage with difficulties and suffering. One or two people have felt like Analio's saying that almost like we don't want to empathize, or that we don't want to empathize very much. And personally, that's not my view of how to practice. I think empathy is really helpful. And I know if you go back to the 10 pillars of Buddhism of Bhante and his discussion of the first precept, in there, he quotes people like, well, he quotes Shelley as well as the poet, as well as Shantideva, all talking about the importance of identifying, deep, real identification, real feeling for suffering in the world. So I don't think we're being asked not to empathize, but we're being asked to empathize skillfully And we're maybe being asked not just to empathize. So not just to empathize with the suffering, otherwise, again, we may just have the first two noble truths. We want to empathize with the sense of all four noble truths, that there's suffering and there's a way out. And in the practice, we reflect on the suffering, we really see the first two noble truths. But then through the Tonglen, we see beings finding the way out. We see them freeing themselves. So if we have empathy with how beings are, and we're in touch with the power of the Dharma, then there's less danger of us getting stuck or lost in the suffering. And that seems to be the issue. So we want to empathize in a way that's empowering and not disempowering, that opens our heart more fully, but doesn't simply lead to us being overwhelmed and lost in the suffering. As we know, reality is dynamic. One of the lakshanas is that everything flows, everything changes all the time. And that's a quality of mind. And we need to be sure that when we're engaging with suffering, we keep that capacity to flow, to keep moving. So yes, we need to, some of the time we're stuck, we're not moving because we're staying nice and safe behind the barricades of ego, thank you very much, and we're not coming out to engage with the world and its suffering. So we're sort of stuck in a defensive position in here. So that needs to start to flow, that needs to open out, that needs to break up. Yeah. So mind needs to be able to flow out to others, to engage with the world, to engage with what's happening, to have an impact on what's happening, to receive what's happening. So that needs to be there. But then we mustn't get stuck out there in the suffering either. See what I mean? Sometimes with people engaging with suffering, they lose their boundaries. They end up sort of down in the water with the drowning people. And they don't lose their boundaries in an awakened way. They lose their boundaries by sort of falling back. In some of his early lectures, Bantu talking about evolution, he talks about there's the level of the lower evolution where you're just part of a group consciousness, and then the first part of going beyond that, the first part of our sort of work as individuals is to sort of free ourselves from that and develop more of a sense of our own, what we believe in, becoming more self-aware of our own emotions, our own ideas, our own ways of looking at the world, to make all that more and more and more positive, to develop a self, to call it that is as positive as possible. And then that needs to widen out. That's, that's just like the upper reaches of the mundane. And there's no final freedom in that. So then we need to widen out. We need to take down the sense of me in here, however positive, and the world out there. So then we go beyond those boundaries. But sometimes we don't want to confuse going beyond those boundaries in that sense with just losing our boundaries, when actually what's happening is that we're falling back into the suffering that's around us. We're sort of getting lost back in that. So we need to be able to distinguish that difference. So it's not that we're not being absorbed in some higher state, we're being lost. We've sort of lost our awareness, we're lost in a sort of emotional state. So then our awareness is caught and we can't disengage. We can't disengage and distinguish. We can't quite tell. We can't tell, yes, this is this person's suffering and this is me and it isn't happening to me, although I really feel for them. And I can have some sense of what it must be like to be in their position, but still, I can make that distinction. Yeah, I can be in touch with my resources. I can be in touch with my refuge. So I'm not lost and I'm not stuck there. Yeah. So awareness can move. Yeah, it can move freely. Yeah. So at times you empathize more strongly. You feel yourself in that position more strongly. Other times you come back to your own sense of your own resources and the Dharma. So there's that flow. Yeah. The fact that there's suffering there with this person or this situation doesn't mean that we have to suffer. We're not forced to suffer by that suffering. So we're not forced to suffer by their suffering, even though we really feel for them and we feel our solidarity for them as human beings. So there are I hope that's reasonably clear, but it's often kind of difficult to get clear on the sort of emotional level, if you know what I mean. We need to feel into things, to feel the difference between where our heart goes out to them and we feel, yes, that's what must it be like, to be ill, to lose your job, to have this happen to you, to have that happen to you. We feel it and we're moved by it and we help. But we don't, as I say, we don't get caught, we don't get lost. Still there's some freedom in how we're practicing. It's good to really explore this area, because there's a lot of suffering and being sort of that we're confronted with anyway, and if we're going to go and meet it on the Bodhisattva path, then it's important that we find, what is the empowering way to do it, and not a disempowering way to do it. And also, we just have to know ourselves well. We have to sort of keep awareness of our reactions and our responses, our history. We need to be aware of where the suffering of somebody else is triggering our own subjective responses. Somebody gets lung cancer, and we had somebody in our family who had it, and we're scared of it, so it triggers us, for instance. And we need to take all that into account, so we're not without being precious with ourselves. We need to feel, well, what can I take on? And where we're asking a lot of ourselves, we need to know that. So we want to be really skillful, self-aware bodhisattvas, not sort of naive bodhisattvas who are just taking on things regardless. We need to be realistic about our limits too. Yeah? Our aim, you know, our intention over however long it takes is to just be able to help anyone, you know, endlessly. And then, okay, in practice now, we do what we can. You know, it's like in the Bodhicitta, Shantideva saying, "Oh, your aim may be to, you know, be able to give up your life for other people, but you know, maybe you just start by making offerings of sort of fruit and, and vegetables to the shrine or something. No, that's where you start. But your aim is to build, but you know what your resources are now, what you're capable of now.
Do you want a question?
Give me the question and I'll see if I... Ooh. Actually, I've just looked at the time. I'll read in the break. And, yeah, so let's have a break now. That's enough to be going on with. So let's take 20 minutes and start again at 20 past.
We'll leave the room while you answer that.
So, welcome back, as they say after the adverts. So we were just looking at the blue sky and Tonglen and how to, all these things. It's a practice. This is a practice, and in practice you don't do things perfectly, you get them wrong, you learn from experience, you can try things out. So there's a practice involved in Tonglen, there's a practice involved in life and in relating to suffering. So sometimes we may be too cautious, we don't risk anything, we don't actually engage enough. Sometimes we may engage, but we don't quite get the right kind of engagement, the right touch with it. And we learn. We keep learning from our experience. That's why it's a practice. Still a few people coming back actually, but we'll just go. So I'm going to do a few more questions. Some of these might be more from people in Australia and New Zealand, just because some of you might as well get them live. So, okay, this one. Are the 4 myths of practice and the 3 approaches, the 3 myths you could call them, of the Bodhisattva in any hierarchical order? As in, are we to work towards the myth of emergence and the shepherd's way of putting other beings first, like one would work towards the Bodhisattva ideal rather than the Arhat ideal? Okay, so you remember we have these 3 myths, which you can actually sort of widen out into 4 different ways of practice. We had that table yesterday with active and receptive and inward and outward. So can you kind of arrange those in a hierarchy? In some ways you can. In some ways you can, because you can say that in the fullness of developing them, having the qualities outside is probably something that you'll move more beyond into feeling the qualities directly, as it were, here. But I suspect that even a long way down the path, again, you would be very fluid, moving between different positions at different times, different emphases. And even if one of them is, or 2 of them are superior in the abstract, I'm not sure how helpful it is to consciously try to work towards one or another of them. I suspect that the best thing to do is to find an appreciation of all of them, because all of them will speak to some aspect of our experience, and it will also mean that we'll be able to relate to other order members and other people who are practicing when they're following one of those other myths more, and we need to be able to do that. That will widen us out as individuals and help us to cohere as a community. So we come to an appreciation of all of them, and then be aware that we can draw on all of them at different times. They are, of course, they're myths. None of them is how it is, so we can move between them. But then we find, probably most of the time, an approach or 1 or 2 approaches out of those 4 that feel like they fit us in our practice now. and really put our energy into those. And if out of that, at a certain point, one of the others emerges as a way of practicing, well, then that will happen naturally, and that's fine. I think often we're better off to have an appreciation of the whole path and different ways of practice, but then to really put our energy into what feels appropriate for us now and see what unfolds out of that, rather than having some kind of overly directed view of how we should be practicing and trying to push our practice in that direction all the time. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. We want a naturally unfolding practice that we feel really happy and feel like we're doing the right thing for us, and we sort of trust that that will then unfold and transform over time. Maybe, the practice will go through different phases, but we don't want to be trying to push ourselves down particular avenues too hard. There's another one. In Anario's paper, he talks about the Bodhisattva postponing their enlightenment for the sake of other beings. You did say to take this poetically, but even so, sometimes this idea gets in the way of me opening up to the refuge fully. It might have more to do with my pessimistic, no pain, no gain conditioning as a child, but I sometimes bump into something in me that wants to hold on to suffering and finds excuses to justify it. Or I somehow lose hope. Would it be okay to let go of the notion of delaying enlightenment? I think it would be okay to let go of that notion, because firstly, it is poetic and you can't take it literally. I mean, let's suppose, even on the theoretical level, let's suppose that there's some bodhisattva and they decide, all right, I'm going to put off my enlightenment until all other beings are enlightened. Well, that incredible act of altruism presumably generates such a tremendous wave of punya that they're pretty much enlightened on the spot. Yeah, so I'm not even sure it kind of works as a theory. But you can get the feeling of it is that you're aiming to put others first, to care for them, in that sort of shepherd kind of way. But we've seen with any piece of Dharma, there's that recommendation, that teaching, and then there's us as the living beings who are trying to practice it with all our tendencies and conditioning and so on. And we need to be producing a dialogue between that Dharma and us as we are. And so out of that, we find those pieces of Dharma which are like the antidotes to the remedies to the particular issues that we have. And we take up the views that out of all the possible Dharma views, we focus on the ones that antidote our tendencies. And out of all the Dharma methods, we focus on the ones that will promote the most growth in us. But all the views, they're all finally skillful means. So if something doesn't work as a skillful means for you, okay, you just leave it on the shrine there, and you don't pick it up and work with it. So often we're concerned with doing the practice right and as in the ideal way, and we don't have the skillful awareness to bring about that dialogue between who we are and the Dharma. Either we feel, well, how I see things must be right and the Dharma must be wrong. So take away the Dharma end of the discussion, or we decide, I must be wrong, and the Dharma must be right, and the Dharma says we do it like this, so I've got to do it like that, even though I tie myself in knots and it seems to be leading me in the wrong direction. So that's not the answer either. There has to be that dialogue. There has to be that free dialogue between us and the Dharma. Okay. While you were talking about the significance of connecting to the refuge when meeting suffering and wishing people well, I had a sense of the inherent optimism of the refuge. Somehow this hadn't occurred to me in this way before. It's almost too good to be true, but it is true. Is it appropriate to cultivate this sense of hopefulness and optimism around the potential for all beings to be free from suffering? It clashes with the notion of the tragedy of beings potentially suffering endlessly in samsara. Or perhaps one cultivates something beyond both, a middle way beyond the two. In a survey of Buddhism, Bhante at one point is discussing whether Buddhism is optimistic or pessimistic. And he says that Buddhism isn't optimistic or pessimistic. It's what he calls melioristic. Melior in Latin means better. So Buddhism isn't optimistic in the sense that, well, without a Dharma path, we can go on creating worlds of suffering indefinitely, pretty much. And certainly we can't see an end to that. That round can be pretty much endless. So Buddhism doesn't have everyone will automatically be enlightened one day view. You have a few Buddhist schools that come close to that. So it's not optimistic, but it's not pessimistic, because there is a way out of suffering if we come to see it and do the work. So, yeah, things won't automatically get better and better and better. There isn't some sense of progress that's just keeps on happening. Like, sometimes you get the sense in Western society, that's how things ought to be. But neither is it all a tragedy and nothing to be done about it. Things can be improved. And so there's the wheel, and there's the spiral path, and there's awakening. So we need a vision which includes all of that. We need the vision of the first two noble truths and the second two noble truths. Yes, and the question about Tonglen. I have a question about the practice, which may seem obvious, but I wanted to know your take on it. It's usually the obvious questions that are the good ones, aren't they? In the Tonglen stage of the practice, where we breathe in the smoky light of the suffering of all beings, does this run the risk of having adverse effects on one's physical or mental health if the refuge in one's heart isn't strongly enough held? I'm noticing that it's getting easier the more I do the practice and the more strongly I invoke the yidam in my heart. I can build up a strong connection with the yidam, and yet when it comes to the Tonglen stage, I often feel an edge of fear of overwhelm in breathing into my body smoky light, in case this energy gets stuck inside or isn't effectively transformed into compassion. This subtle layer of fear holds me back from totally absorbing myself in the process. Do you have any suggestions on how to work with this? So, yes, I think this is a very, very common experience, that we breathe in this shadow, this smoky light, and it's kind of akin to breathing in sort of a room full of cigarette smoke or something, or like that. And that brings up a kind of fear of contamination, a fear of pollution, a fear of illness, a fear of sometimes overwhelm, all kinds of things. And I think that's deliberately there in the practice, if you like. I think that's one of the aspects of the practice, is to bring us up against all our self-cherishing, all our desire to keep ourselves safe and comfortable and well. And so, yeah, practice like this will bring up our fears. It will bring up our anxieties. And that's part of the practice. Part of the practice is to make these things more conscious. But then, because the practice, the wisdom aspect of the practice is also about looking into the me that is afraid of practicing the Bodhisattva path, the me that is afraid of being very generous, the me that's afraid of somehow my needs won't be met if I look after others. All those things, that's part of what the practice is asking us to become more fully aware of. So one approach to this is to take a sort of insight approach, and when that sort of fear comes up, have a sense of where exactly is the me in this. How do I know it's there? Yes, there's the body and the feelings and the thoughts, but it feels like there's a me somehow standing behind all that, in the middle of all that, and I'm the one who is going to get lung cancer through this, breathing on this smoky light. I'm going to be sort of somehow polluted, and it's going to have an effect on my subtle body, and that's going to manifest in the physical body, and I'm going to get ill. I'm the one who's going to die. So we investigate that. We see what we can find, because as we know, Buddhism is saying that there isn't a substantial me standing behind the experience, the one who has the body, who has the feelings, who has the thoughts. So the practice will bring us up against these things. The Bodhisattva path is a path of risk. There's huge reward that comes out of it, but we have to step out of our comfort zone to get to it. So let's acknowledge that. I mean, the whole Dharma life is risk. Life is risky. We can't health and safety it all away. And but the bit of us that really wants to stay completely safe naturally gets challenged by all this. So it gives us an opportunity to make all this more conscious. And again, we use the Tonglen. So there am I practicing, and I breathe in that sort of smoky light, and I feel like, oh, I'm not sure this is doing me any good. Oh, perhaps it's bad for me. And then, okay, so we remember the Tonglen, and along with that, we breathe in all the respiratory diseases of all beings. We breathe in all the suffering of all those who live in pollution, all those who cycle to work in the smog. All those we breathe in all the fear of all those beings of being somehow polluted, contaminated, and we let all that go into the refuge, into emptiness, and we breathe out freedom from fear. We can breathe out, a sense of clean fresh air as well. But fundamentally, we're breathing out, freedom from fear, freedom from anxiety. And if the refuge, isn't strong enough, okay, let's sort of again, we can feel into how is that not strong enough? Are we not setting up the conditions for that to be the case? What's going on? It's like this, we're always learning about the experience. Very often with the practice, there's a sense of, well, I should do it and I should do it right and I should get through it. And yeah, I've done all the stages, so I've done a good job. Gold star tick. Actually, the practice is a learning ground. We're much better off, kind of the practice sort of going really off the rails and kind of learning, how it went off the rails and how we could have the signaling different next time so it doesn't go off the rails. That's very often where the transformation is. So yes, let's go for it in the practice. Let's really go for it and go for the real issues and meet things. And so if we're breathing in things and it feels and those fears arise, okay, let's investigate. Let's explore. Let's explore how we're not fully in touch with the refuge. Is there a way that we can draw on it more? Let's explore the me that's getting worried here and really use that as the practice. Let's do it. Let's use Tonglen with it. Then at the end of the practice, if you want, just for a minute or so, you can just check, that if it feels like there's anything from the practice that's unhelpful that you've been kind of left with, just imagine all that going into emptiness, like dissolving into the blue sky, or being purified just with white light. So yes, we're not wanting to leave any sort of psychic debris from the practice. So we have a little clean up, but that's after we fully put ourselves into it and really learned what we can learn. Yeah. Okay, I think that's enough questions. It's as many as I've got time for. Yeah, so I'll see if I can do one or two more tomorrow. But we still, this afternoon, sorry?
You don't have tomorrow, this afternoon.
Did I say tomorrow? I meant in session 3, this upcoming session. I didn't mean tomorrow. I didn't even mean this afternoon, in case it isn't afternoon where you are. I meant in the next session. And in that, we'll look at point 8, which is actually a very rich and important point. So, au revoir to those of you who I may not see again live later, but please do catch up with the recording. Final exciting episode. Sitting alive awareness, aware aliveness. Still on that Vajra seat. Still opening towards the sky. As best we can, letting the body be a field of kindly awareness. And let's have a sense moving into our heart center. And invoking a refuge. So in our heart is an embodiment, love and compassion, wisdom, courage, patience, generosity. And on the in-breath, all our difficulties, all our faults and failings, all our fears and worries, grasping and small-mindedness, and so on. All dissolve into the refuge in our heart. And with the out-breath, comes the opposite of those things. And the positive qualities. Confidence and courage, heroism, generosity, love, serenity, and so on. Now let's widen out our attention and be aware of one particular klesha, unskillful quality, that's there in the world. Maybe connected to one of our favorite kleshas, maybe not. We breathe it in. Breathe it into the refuge. And with the out breath, come the remedies, the antidotes, the positive qualities appropriate to that situation, appropriate to that suffering from that klesha. Seeing, feeling that suffering relieved, that klesha gone. How is it without it? And when we're ready, letting the image of these relieved and refreshed beings fade away. We've had an image of the refuge in our heart. We can let that stay, or if it doesn't feel right, we can dissolve that away. Sensing the qualities still there without the image. Just let everything rest for a few moments. When we take an out breath with a sense of not holding anything back for ourselves from the practice, including everyone in the benefits of it. Okay, thank you very much for that. Sorry, I've slightly overrun. And hope to see you live in the next final session. And those of you who won't make it for that, hope to see you some way soon.